Chapter 571 The Terrifying Beast Lord Soul Engineer Legion. If their spirit fire wasn't completely extinguished, these spectral creatures wouldn't truly die. They could reabsorb power from the spectral demiplane and reform their bodies. However, a lot of energy had to be expended to reconstruct the undead from spirit fire. The source of this energy was the spectral demiplane. Through his understanding of spectral demiplanes over these past few years, Douluo had gradually come to understand that the spectral demiplane was a spatial dimension that Electrolux had opened on his own. It wasn't as stable as a main dimensional plane like the Douluo continent. More simply put, the spectral demiplane was like a dimensional plane that was formed using pure energy. Everything inside it was made using energy. During the process of creation, Electrolux must have used some kind of unknown method to pour in extremely stable energy. This stable power was enough to ensure self-sufficiency. Once the spectral creatures were released from inside to fight, this stable energy would be drained. Of course, the energy was drained at an extremely slow speed. However, if this persisted and the energy wasn't replenished, the energy in the demiplane would sooner or later be completely drained. When that happened, the entire demiplane would collapse. Of course, such a situation wasn't realistic. The more he understood necromancy, the more Huo admired and respected Electrolux. When Electrolux was creating the spectral demiplane, he didn't just make it stable. He even created a magical flow. This flow was similar to photosynthesis after plants absorbed water. If the spectral creatures in the demiplane died in the outside world, some of the energy in the demiplane would indeed be lost. However, this loss would be very little. In that case, how was the energy in the demiplane replenished? It was actually a very simple process. Through the non-spectral creatures that went in and out of the demiplane. Simply put, if Huo opened his demiplane and walked in, all the energy in his body would receive some kind of special guidance and transformation within it. A part of his aura would cause a chemical reaction inside the demiplane, thereby increasing the amount of energy in the demiplane. This reaction would only stop after the internal energy of the demiplane was saturated. What aura did Huo bring in? It was light. It was the aura of light from the outside world. The aura of light that came from sunlight and from one's heart were the sources of such energy. As a result, if the inheritor of the demiplane possessed the aura of light in his body, and their abilities weren't evil in nature, there wasn't a very high risk that the demiplane would be drained of energy. Huo had brought in 3 soul engineer legions before. How strong was the power of light that came from 3,000 people? As a result, the energy in the demiplane was in a saturated state. Even so, Huo wouldn't overly drain the energy in the demiplane. After all, these spectral creatures were the foundation of this demiplane. If he drained the energy of this plane too much, there would be problems. Moreover, their existence constituted an army for Huo. Although it wasn't very convenient to use them on the battlefield, they were still very useful in special circumstances, such as now. What did an army need? Apart from strength, it needed a marshal. This was also the reason why Huo let the spectral army take a break temporarily. Although the goal of the spectral army was to expend the energy of these 2 soul engineer legions and not to defeat them, it was still very draining for them to do so. It was naturally best for them to conserve as much as possible. Suddenly, low-pitched incantations could be heard from all directions. Liches started to straighten their bodies among the spectral creatures. They raised bone staffs. Right now, they were reciting the same incantations as Huo. A terrifying spectral aura quickly rose, and a dense greyish fog engulfed the entire forest. All living creatures in the forest quickly ran for their lives. They didn't dare to come into contact with the greyish fog. A terrifying strength was brewing. Both the Imperial Dragon and Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer legions were under immense pressure right now. They unwittingly increased the strength of their protective soul barriers. This was because they didn't know how strong of an attack they were going to be subjected to next, and they also didn't know when it would come. They were being drained physically and mentally. Spectral creatures were naturally ugly and fierce. Any ordinary human's first reaction when facing spectral creatures would be fear and anxiety. Under such a circumstance, they would be mentally drained much faster than they would be in a normal fight. This was what Huo was trying to achieve too. Right now, the situation was like that. Even Huo didn't expect that the spectral creatures would be able to drain these 2 soul engineer legions so much. The recovery of their mental fatigue was even slower than the recovery of their soul power. The 2 soul engineer legions had been consecutively attacked by Huo and Tang Clan. Many soul engineer lives were lost. Right now, they were all alarmed and scared. How could they not be fearful in the face of so many spectral creatures? Xie and Shu Tianyuan's train of thought was very clear. In fact, they were well aware that the enemy in hiding didn't have the intention of defeating 2 beast lord ranked soul engineer legions using a spectral army. The enemy's true intention should have been to force them back into the sky. Since this was the case, there must be some kind of trap in the air. If the enemy was an evil soul master, it was highly possible that he wasn't the only one. This was why both legion commanders were very composed right now. They could only wait for the enemy to reveal himself. They weren't too concerned about the spectral army. However, they had neglected their soul engineer psychological changes. The incantations lasted for a minute. Following this, a greyish air current swept towards the linked defensive barrier formed by the 2 soul engineer legions. Without any orders, all types of soul tools were immediately unleashed. They were used to dissipate the greyish air current that was surging towards them. However, the 2 soul engineer legions were astonished to find that their attacks didn't have any effect on the greyish air current. Yes, there wasn't any effect at all. It didn't even achieve the slightest effect. How's this possible? The same thought appeared in everyone's mind. After this, they found that the greyish air current stopped when it was some distance away from them. After this, it settled to the ground. It didn't invade their defensive formation. Just as the soul engineers heaved a sigh of relief, their eyes opened wide at the next instant. The bones and mangled corpses that were originally on the ground reformed as they were nourished by the greyish air current. They turned into skeletons and vampires that crawled up from the ground. It was important to know that there were many spectral creatures that had died on the battlefield under the hands of soul tools. Right now, the revival of these spectral creatures caused the entire place to be populated. The more terrifying thing was that every soul engineer developed the belief that spectral creatures couldn't die any further. This was the scariest part. In fact, spectral creatures could only remain alive for a restricted period of time. However, these soul engineers didn't know that. They also didn't notice that these spectral creatures that were revived weren't as strong as the abominations and terranites. They were only skeletons and vampires, which were on the lower tiers among spectral creatures. Humans could unleash terrifying strength in the face of fear. This was something not to be doubted. As a result, the fighting strength of the 2 soul engineer legions was completely unleashed. Dazzling light struck the spectral army, causing many of the spectral creatures to be torn to pieces. The skeletons and vampires took only a few steps before they were torn apart. Countless soul engineers were roaring furiously. They were unleashing their strongest soul tools in the most maniacal way possible. They were attacking furiously. An energy storm raged, and frightening soul rays and cannon shells caused this entire region to turn into a region of death. There were no longer any corpses. When the spectral creatures collapsed this time, their bodies directly turned to dust. Even the ground started to cave in a little because of this intense clash between the spectral creatures and the 2 soul engineer legions. From above, only a huge ball of light could be seen. Nothing else could be seen at all. At the very start, Shu Tianyuan and Xie were very comforted by the offensive strength of their 2 soul engineer legions. However, they felt that something was amiss very soon. Their soul engineer legions were a little too fierce, and there seemed to be something wrong with their morale. It wasn't just a high, there was something else. Fear. Xie soon realized that his soul engineers were all fearful right now. He had finally realized it. However, his realization came too late. Xie shouted almost without hesitation. He commanded everyone to stop attacking. However, every soul tool was currently being unleashed at full power as the hundreds of soul engineers did their best to muster the greatest of their offensive ability. How far could his voice travel? No one heard him. Everyone was frantically and furiously attacking. There was only one thought in their heads: decimate all the spectral creatures in front of them. The situation was a little out of control right now. Xie tried to knock a few soul engineers down. However, these soul engineers immediately jumped up after they were knocked down. After they jumped up, they continued attacking. Unless they were knocked out, they wouldn't stop at all. Such a frantic attack only slowly ceased after 5 minutes, when there were not many spectral creatures left to kill. Xie and Shu Tianyuan both looked very glum. While soul engineers were well respected in the army, there were still soldiers in the end. The duty of soldiers was to listen to orders. Once soldiers stopped listening to orders, it meant that the entire army was out of control. That was the most terrifying thing. For the soul engineers that stopped, their fear slowly vanished as they were excited. They had completely killed all the spectral creatures. There was even no sign of any broken limbs on the ground. However, all of them were very fatigued as their fear disappeared. Many of them dropped to the ground panting. This was the after effect of overexcitement. At this moment, they might not be physically exhausted, but they were certainly mentally exhausted. Xie suddenly thought of something, and his figure flashed. He rushed towards the few soul engineers among the legion who were in charge of surveillance. However, it was a pity that he was still asleep. step too slow. A soul engineer who was in charge of surveillance subconsciously exclaimed, Why are there still so many spectral creatures outside? Xie Xuanqin shut him up. However, he had already said something that he shouldn't have before Xie Xuanqin could cover his mouth. The soul engineers who were both excited and fatigued right now were immediately stunned when they heard his words. There's more. There's more of them. What about the hard work that they had put in earlier? A deeper fear than before immediately swept over them at this point. A few soul engineers who were weaker and greatly drained from earlier suffered mental breakdowns. They charged towards the outside of the protective soul barrier as they screamed frantically. They were trying to flee. All of their faces were contorted at this point. Bang, 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 bang. Soul rays shot out accurately. Headshot. The first 6 soul engineers who had charged out immediately collapsed into a pool of blood. All the soul engineers subconsciously turned their attention to where the soul rays came from. They only saw the grim-looking Shu Tianyuan. Silence. Whoever dares to rebel shall be killed. Shu Tianyuan's cold voice could be heard by every soul engineer. This also roused their fear of military discipline. Shu Tianyuan raised his right hand, and a completely jade blue soul cannon shell appeared in his hand. What's there to be frantic about? All of you are useless. Have you forgotten who you are? Who are we? We are part of the hand that protects the nation of the Sun Moon Empire. We are a beast lord-ranked soul engineer legion, a strength to behold. No matter what enemy we face, they can only submit to us. What's there to fear? Do you see this? Do you see what's in my hand? It's a class 9 stationary soul cannon shell. So what if there's another attack like earlier, but only 10 or 100 times stronger? We can easily destroy them. Are all of you scared just because they're ugly spectral creatures? Observe, watch closely, see how many spectral creatures will survive this time. As he spoke, Shu Tianyuan's hand flashed with light again, and a giant cannon appeared on his shoulder. A Vice Legion commander personally inserted the jade blue shell into the cannon. Shu Tianyuan didn't even deliberately aim. As a jade blue light shone, the shell immediately shut out. In the forest in the distance, a terrifying jade blue light brightened the entire sky. A massive wave of energy swept over them, and it seemed like the entire world had turned jade blue at this instant. The detector in the observer's hand revealed that more than a third of the red spots had disappeared. No traces were left behind. This was the strength of a top-grade shell. The soul engineers' morale and sense of fear slowly returned to normal as the jade blue light flashed. The soul engineers lowered their heads. They stood up and repented for their behavior earlier. Xie Xuanqin silently heaved a sigh of relief and gave a thumbs up to Shu Tianyuan. However, Shu Tianyuan knew things weren't all that smooth. Earlier, he shouldn't have used that class 9 shell no matter what. Those spectral creatures were only summoned by evil soul masters. They weren't capable of finding the evil soul masters. The class 9 shell would only serve to make their enemies more prudent and therefore more difficult to deal with in the future. However, did he have a choice? The morale of his troops had been very low, and they were about to carry out a mutiny. He couldn't think of a better way to react to the situation. What he didn't know was that Huo Yua was a little unsettled right now. He hadn't expected the other party to use a class 9 stationary soul cannon shell. Fortunately, his spiritual detection covered the entire place. He felt that things went right when Shu Tianyuan took out the class 9 shell. He immediately ordered his spectral army to divide into 2 files and retreat to the sides of the trajectory that the shell was moving in. Even so, his spectral army still sustained heavy losses. Of course, both he and Tang Clan managed to hide far away. Although Huo Yua had gained the upper hand in this confrontation, his advantage was greatly reduced after the other party unleashed a class 9 shell. Of course, Huo Yua had a class 9 shell with him too. However, he couldn't bear to use it. He would not touch it unless the situation was truly desperate. It was simply too valuable. He's gone all out by using a class 9 shell. After a moment of temporary shock, Huo Yua quickly calmed himself down. The enemy chose to use a class 9 shell even when he wasn't supposed to use it no matter the circumstance. What did that signify? It meant that the enemy had lost a little control after being subjected to pressure by him. The 6 soul engineer legions who had attempted to flee earlier were the best proof. Since this was the case, Huo Yua was bent on applying more pressure. Furthermore, he was going to try another method. Under Huo Yua's orders, the spectral army quickly retreated. The destructiveness of a class 9 shell was simply too terrifying. Any living creature would be decimated under such an attack. Even an ultimate Douluo wouldn't dare to directly resist the strength of a class 9 stationary soul cannon shell. To prevent sustaining more losses, Huo Yua commanded his spectral army to cease attacking. After all, did he only have one strategy? It was crucial to remember that he wasn't just a powerful titled Douluo. He was also a class 9 soul engineer. As a soul engineer, he was very familiar with the abilities of a soul engineer. For example, a linked defensive barrier might be able to isolate energy and spiritual attacks, but it couldn't isolate the effects of temperature. While temperature was also a form of energy, the difference was that it could be conducted in many ways apart from air. It was almost impossible to completely isolate temperature changes. At least, it wasn't plausible based on current soul tool technology. They're gone. The spectral creatures have vanished. Rapturous cheers sounded within the protective soul barrier. Shu Tianyuan really heaved a sigh of relief this time. At the same time, he felt very proud of himself. The enemy had finally retreated after he used a class 9 shell. Did this also mean that their attacks would cease? Yes. How many people could remain composed in the face of a class 9 shell? If the shell killed a portion of their enemies earlier, it would be even more perfect. Xie Xuanqin also appeared much more relaxed. He came to Shu Tianyuan's side and whispered, Brother Shu, let everyone rest first. We can't leave in such a state. Yes. Shu Tianyuan nodded. The earlier outburst had caused many of the soul engineers earlier to be greatly drained, whether it was in terms of their spiritual or soul power. They couldn't possibly leave without resting. At the same time, they needed to observe the situation further to determine whether their enemies had really retreated. Members of the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer Legion are in charge of maintaining the protective soul barrier. Members of the Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer Legion take the time to rest. Shu Tianyuan immediately gave an order. Brother Xie, should we continue with our earlier plan? Shu Tianyuan softly asked Xie Xuanqin. Xie Xuanqin replied, even if we want to continue on with it, we still have to wait for some time. Let everyone recover first. Shu Tianyuan was astonished as he said, the Doling Empire's weather is so weird. It's always so gloomy. Hey, it's snowing. It was already deep into autumn. The Doling Empire was close to the north of the Douluo continent, while its capital, Doling City, was also close to the north of the empire. This was why its temperature was lower compared to other empires. Snowflakes started to fall from the sky, and they drifted before they landed on the ground. It was only after a short while before the ground turned into a patch of white. Normally, low temperatures weren't an issue for these soul masters. The soul engineers of the Imperial Dragon Soul Engineer were still chortling as they saw their protective soul barrier being engulfed by a layer of snow. The protective soul barrier didn't have any temperature on its own. However, the great number of soul rays and shells that had been used to attack earlier caused the temperature inside and outside the barrier to differ slightly. This was why the snow quickly melted when it fell on the barrier. However, a layer of snow still formed on the barrier, as there was simply too much snow falling. From afar, it seemed like a giant white semicircular object. It was very interesting. The temperature in the Doling Empire is really ridiculous. It's really getting a little cold. One soul engineer said softly. At the same time, he pulled his clothes closer to the center of his body. Many soul engineers were sweating from their earlier outburst. As it snowed, the temperature fell drastically. Many of them started to pull their clothes closer to the center of their bodies as a means of keeping warm. The snow gradually got heavier and heavier. On the surface of the barrier, the accumulated snow also started to thicken. The temperature didn't fall further, but the soul engineers inside the barrier still felt cold. Shu Tianyuan commanded a few people to start a fire to keep the rest warm. At the same time, they were also taking turns to eat. Very soon, piping hot soup was sent to Shu Tianyuan and Xie Xuanqin. Both of them were still full of soul power. They didn't need to meditate. After taking a few mouthfuls of soup, their bodies started to warm up. They also began to relax. Brother Xie, I didn't expect things to be so successful at the front line and problematic at the back end for this mission. A cold light flashed in Xie Xuanqin's eyes. He downed his soup and said, when we return, we must not rest until we deal with the Holy Ghost Church. How dare they lay their hands on us? They must be sick of living. Shu Tianyuan squinted and exuded a killer aura. Holy Ghost Church. Bloody Holy Ghost Church. I wonder if they're gone. Right now, I actually do wish they haven't left. It's a pity that our detectives can't find their exact location. Otherwise, even if a class 9 shell can't kill them, it'll still be enough to skin them. Since when have we become so passive? Xie Xuanqin said, I really hate that fellow who can conceal himself. It's our first time meeting such a soul master. He can conceal himself and prevent us from finding him. Otherwise, he'd be dead even if you were an ultimate Douluo, given the combined strength of our 2 soul engineer legions. Shu Tianyuan said, let's not talk about that for now. Let's rest first. Later, we still need to carry out our plan. Xuangan stood up and said, I'll take a look at the detectors. We can't see the outside because of the snow. We can only observe using our detectors. It's best if we avoid any problems. Shu Tianyuan said, things should be fine for now. My shell would have hurt many of them. In my opinion, they would have escaped if they're clever enough. Xuangan nodded, but he was very cautious, and therefore he still went to check. He returned very quickly. Everything appeared to be fine outside. No enemies had appeared. The temperature inside the barrier was rising due to the fire that had been lit. However, the temperature outside the barrier was very low due to the falling snow. Very soon, a layer of ice formed on the surface of the barrier due to the temperature difference between the inside and outside of the barrier. Furthermore, this layer of ice was thickening. No discoveries were made by the Sun Moon Empire's detectors, but right now, there was one person silently standing outside the protective soul barrier. This person's body temperature was exactly the same as the external air temperature. Thermal detectors were useless against him. Even the oscillations released by oscillation detectors couldn't manage to detect anything abnormal as they passed through his body. No one discovered any special changes that came from his body. This person stood outside just like that. His left hand was still on that layer of ice. The temperature outside was already below zero. The snowflakes in the sky were getting thicker and thicker as they drifted. It was just that the layer of ice blocked the view of those covered by the barrier. No one realized that there were a few strange forces within that layer of ice. The undulations coming from these few forces weren't very strong, but they fused perfectly with ice. They also helped to isolate the temperature inside and outside the barrier. Thermal detectors were used to detect external heat, but they couldn't judge external temperature. This was why the soul engineers within the barrier didn't know that the temperature in the outside world was dropping very rapidly. Time passed second after second. The snow outside the barrier kept getting thicker and thicker along with the layer of ice. After taking turns to rest and eat, the Imperial Dragon and Evil Eye Tyrant Soul Engineer legions remained for another 4 hours. They were even taking turns to sleep and used sleep to recover their minds. Right now, all of them were feeling rather optimistic. Shu Tianyuan was delighted as he commented, there's no movement outside. It seems like they've really retreated. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let us fully recover. After 4 hours of rest, he and Xuangan were back in their peak condition. However, he forgot that they had wasted 4 hours of time, even though they had managed to recover within these 4 hours. To some people, 4 hours was sufficient to do many things. Brother Shu, should we leave now? Xuangan asked Shu Tianyuan. Shu Tianyuan nodded and said, the layer of ice and snow is already quite thick. We should leave soon and return. Let's be more wary of any enemies later. Xuangan nodded and said, everyone, be alert. Every 10 of you will form one team and unleash a linked defensive barrier. Keep a tight formation. We're preparing to leave. All the soul engineers were excited as they discovered that they were about to leave. They had been in here for a long time. They had even fought earlier. They wanted to return and get some proper rest. Protective soul barriers were formed, and the massive barrier that was covering everyone slowly weakened. However, they were astonished to discover that there was still a semicircular barrier outside, even though their own protective soul barrier had weakened. It was a barrier made out of ice and snow. All the snow has turned to ice. The largest protective soul barrier had now completely disappeared and was replaced by smaller protective soul barriers. The snow outside didn't continue to fall. It was like they were in a house made of ice. It was very special. Try using soul rays. Xuangan said. Immediately, a soul engineer unleashed a soul ray. Suddenly, a hole appeared, revealing sunlight from outside. At the same time, a gust of chilly air rushed in from this hole. Haha, this is really interesting. I didn't know that our protective soul barrier could still make a house. Shu Tianyuan and Xuangan were both astonished. It was also their first time encountering something like this. However, they couldn't afford to remain here any longer. Shu Tianyuan immediately gave an order. Every small team will be a unit. Every unit will fire a soul ray to get rid of this layer of ice. We'll immediately rise into the air once we leave. We must remain close to one another. Begin. The row of soul engineers in front immediately raised their soul tools and fired at the layer of ice. A series of cracking sounds were heard. The layer of ice was destroyed, revealing the outside world. Gusts of indescribably chilly air immediately overswept them. These gusts of air struck the barriers that the soul engineers had formed earlier. While the air currents were blocked, the chill still engulfed everyone. It was really a world of ice and snow outside. Only white could be seen. Snowflakes were dancing everywhere amidst raging winds. They were completely unaware that the outside world had become like that because the layer of ice had blocked their vision earlier. Just as they were astonished, they also felt the chill invading their bodies. The temperature dropped to below -50 degrees Celsius almost instantly. This was even after their protective soul barriers had isolated part of the cold. Every soul engineer felt as if ice water had been poured on them. Their blood was about to freeze. Such a sudden change caused them to shudder. All of them subconsciously shuddered, and their movements also became a little stiff. However, they were soul masters. They quickly circulated their soul power and tried to resist the chill that was invading their bodies. However, this didn't seem to work at all. This is not good. If Shu Tianyuan and Xuangan couldn't tell that something was wrong at this point, they were not fit to be legion commanders. This extreme level of chill was beyond their idea of ordinary. It was even getting worse, especially when the snowflakes made clanging noises as they scraped the surface of the protective soul barriers. Rush out. Rise into the sky. Xuangan shouted without any hesitation. Right now, rushing out was their main priority. Evidently, they had fallen into the enemy's trap. They couldn't think about how they did this at this point. However, such a soul skill couldn't possibly engulf the entire world no matter how strong it was. Once they rushed out and rose into the sky, they would naturally escape the cold. Xuangan reacted very quickly. He was also the first to rush out. However, it was also at this moment that the snow dome that had left them in awe earlier blew apart without any warning. Boom boom boom. As tremendous booms rang out, countless blocks of ultimate ice blew apart. The terrifying explosive force instantly turned into extremely strong air currents that engulfed the protective soul barriers that the soul engineers had formed. Earlier, 10 people had been assigned to one protective soul barrier. This meant that there were many protective soul barriers subjected to this terrifying explosive force. The combination of 10 soul masters with cultivations between 4 rings and 5 rings was still quite strong. However, they didn't stand a chance against a titled Douluo. This was the difference in absolute strength. Thanks so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also leave a comment down below with suggestions on what novels to read.